The reign of King William IV and Queen Adelaide was a brief one. It's usually tacked on to the end of the Georgian era rather than recognized as its own historical period. But Adelaide herself was well loved by the people of the British Commonwealth, appreciated for her charity, admired for her devotion, and pitied for her many miscarriages, stillbirths, and children who died tragically young. The South Australian capital city Adelaide was named after her, as well as a village in East Anglia, streets and hospitals all over the UK. And, like Queen Alexandra after her, she also has an obscure sandwich named after her. I've had more than one Brit tell me that they'd never heard of an Adelaide sandwich, and I'm not surprised. I first learned of its existence a few years ago when researching the Coronation chicken sandwich. According to a 2010 biography of Constance Spry, cookbook author, florist to royalty, and co-creator of Coronation Chicken along with her frequent collaborator Rosemary Hume. The source of inspiration for Coronation Chicken, which is essentially a cold chicken salad in a curry cream sauce with dried fruit, was the Adelaide Sandwich recipe from the 19th century recipe book Savories à la Mode by Harriet Ann de Salis. The passage goes on to describe the Adelaide Sandwich as chicken with a curry and apricot butter. The problem is, the Adelaide sandwiches from Savories à la Mode do not remotely match that description. They consist of diced fowl mixed into a bechamel sauce with Parmesan cheese, cayenne pepper, and anchovies, served between two toasted rounds of bread, topped with melted cheese. Constance Spry's own cookery book of 1956 contains no recipe for Adelaide sandwiches. However, I have dug deep into sandwich history and found a few historical recipes for Adelaide sandwiches that do seem to lend support to the sandwich having chicken and curry elements. They bear varying levels of similarity to the sandwich as described in Mrs. de Salis's book, and very little to what would become the Coronation Chicken of the late 20th century. But it is an interesting look at how a recipe is adapted over time and, through the hands and words of multiple cooks, can evolve into something so completely different than how it started. You may recall Mrs. Isabella Beeton, whose recipe for toast sandwiches has made the rounds of internet memery a few times over the years. In that same 1861 work, her Book of Household Management, she published a recipe for Adelaide sandwiches. And this sandwich recipe does use both chicken and curry flavors, though there is nary an apricot in sight. Instead, the sandwich is assembled by spreading slices of bread with curry butter, laying a thin slice of ham and a thin slice of chicken on one side, salting the chicken, then completing the sandwich with another slice of curry buttered bread. These sandwiches are then cut into 4 triangles and served arranged on a plate garnished with parsley. Ham and curry is not a combination I see much these days, outside of a specific creative uses of leftovers genre of recipes. Ham flavors can vary in intensity, but the tavern-style ham I used here was relatively mild, not salty or smoky enough to clash with the curry flavors, but enough to provide them a bit of a savory boost. The combination of ham and chicken leans into a sort of proto-clubhouse sandwich flavor, but the use of curry butter here is unexpected in that context and a little jarring. As small tea sandwich dainties, these are an interesting diversion, but it's not surprising that this sandwich has for over 150 years languished in the small pages of a mostly forgotten 19th century cookbook, rather than continued to grace menus. Charles Elme Frankatelli was a chef to aristocrats and royals, something of a celebrity chef in a time when such personalities were far more rare than they are today. He published 4 books in his day, each of which was aimed at a different target audience. 1861's Cook's Guide was aimed at the middle-class household. The recipes from that book are available at a website, thecooksguide.com. Frankatelli's version of the Adelaide sandwich calls for combining Cross and Blackwell brand curry paste, specifically, with an unidentified sauce, before mixing in finely diced ham and chicken. This meat paste is then spread in thick layers between pan-toasted rounds of bread, cut the size of a crown piece, or about 1.5 inches across, and topped with a mixture of Parmesan cheese and butter before being finished in an oven for 5 minutes. The mystery sauce was likely some form of butter sauce, consisting of a roux that's thinned with boiling water and then thickened again with just a whole lot of butter. I enhanced mine with a bit of nutmeg, a squeeze of lemon, and a dollop of cream. The resulting sauce is something like a cross between a bechamel and a hollandaise, but not really much like either, lacking the creaminess of the bechamel and the rich egg yolk flavor of the hollandaise. But it does make a good base for a sandwich spread. This version of the sandwich is much closer in structure to the crisp cheese-topped croutons of the Adelaide Sandwich as described by DeSalis, while retaining the ham, chicken, curry flavors of the Mrs. Beeton version of the sandwich, published the same year as this recipe in 1861. And that's 24 years after the end of Adelaide's tenure as queen, and only 12 years after her death. The sandwich recipe has clearly diverged by this time, but some elements remain common: ham and chicken with curry, bread, and butter. But while researching these recipes, I caught hints of an older recipe yet. A snippet from a Google search result that claimed the Adelaide Sandwich may have been invented in Scotland. I dug in to find records of an exhibition put on by the National Library of Scotland around 10 years ago, called Lifting the Lid: 400 Years of Food and Drink in Scotland. The exhibit is no more, but I reached out to the library and received a very helpful response, with descriptions and links to much of the material on display, including scans of Mrs. Anstruther's receipt book, a handwritten household recipe book containing material dated between roughly 1840 and 1860. Its version of the Adelaide Sandwich recipe is similar to the Frankatelli version, but also different in a few significant ways. Once again, there were assumptions made in writing this recipe that are not obvious to someone reading it 200 years later and an ocean away. An unspecified sauce, likely a butter sauce again, which I will continue to use; pickles, which could mean anything from sweet gherkins to chutneys to fermented vegetables; and cheese, which would most likely not be a hard cheese like Parmesan in Scotland in the 1840s. I wasn't sure what it would be. So I reached out through some social media contacts who put me in touch with Tenement Kitchen on TikTok, a Scottish food historian you should all follow. He was good enough to gift me some of his time and answer my questions, and even send over a few recipes. The cheese, he said, could easily be Dunlop, a cheddar-like cheese, or might even actually be cheddar by the mid-1800s. Pickles, he said, would likely not be gherkins, but there were plenty of pickled vegetables during that era. And he's right. Looking through Mrs. Anstruther's book, I was able to identify a few pickle recipes: pickled cucumbers, to pickle onions, and most intriguingly, instructions to pickle cauliflower that included curry powder in the pickling brine. So I made Mrs. Anstruther's pickled cauliflower, resulting in very sour, spicy, pickled florets suspended in a paste of curry, ginger, and horseradish-flavored shallots. They are intense, and it doesn't take much for them to have an outsized effect on a sandwich. The curry flavor here is not as prominent as in Mrs. Beeton's or Frankatelli's versions of the sandwich that use curry powders or pastes directly. It's there, but subservient to the vinegary pickle that carries it, the onion that accompanies it, even the melted mess of cheddar and butter that tops it. This is not a sandwich, I think, that would inspire me to create a cold dish of curry chicken and apricot fit for a queen. But I am not a Le Cordon Bleu trained cook, not a chef, nor even a florist to royalty. Somewhere out there, a missing link recipe may exist, the actual recipe that Constance Spry and or Rosemary Hume were thinking of when they imagined an Adelaide sandwich featuring curry, chicken, and apricot. After all, by 1920, an American cookbook author named George E. Cornforth had reimagined the sandwich as featuring jelly or marmalade between slices of French toast, topped by whipped cream. But, as of yet, I have not found that missing link.